Hello and welcome to episode number 246. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. According to Harold Kerzner, 90% of what we project managers do is communicating. And a lot of this communication is done during project meetings. It can sometimes feel like you are running from one meeting to another and that your time is often wasted. This episode is sponsored by the Project Management Podcast. Yes, the Project Management Podcast is sponsoring the Project Management Podcast today because we wanted to remind you that as a certified PMP, you can earn 30 PDUs from us here at absolutely zero cost. All you have to do is simply listen to our interviews and then claim your PDUs with PMI. To find out more, please go to pm-podcast.com/PDU, and please do tell your project management colleagues about us. So, back to our interviews. So they don't start on time, the issues aren't dealt with, there is no agenda, the meetings have no focus, nobody assigns any follow-ups or tasks, and of course then meetings also don't end on time. But what if there were a way to make meetings much more productive? Jeffrey Steinke thinks there is, and he has a lot of good suggestions for you. It all starts by not having a meeting and taking things offline, and then if you do need to actually have a meeting, it requires planning and follow-through. You can look forward to our usual bucket full of recommendations that you can apply on your project meetings tomorrow. And now, do you have your donuts ready? Let's go have a meeting. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview.
Today with Jeffrey Steinke, former project manager and the co-founder of Less Meeting.
Hello, Jeff. Welcome to the Project Management Podcast.
Hey, Cornelius. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. How are you doing in Atlanta?
I'm doing fantastic. We have a nice 80-degree day, so it's not the typical hot and humid you'd expect.
All right. And just to make everybody jealous, I'm out in California. The weather is, as always, beautiful.
I think you still beat me.
So we want to talk about meetings. We're having a meeting right now, sort of, over Skype. But why do you say that meetings are the number one time waster?
You know, where do I begin with this one? I don't think this is going to surprise too many people. There's a laundry list of reasons. They run off topic. They're not planned well. They run late. There is often no purpose. People are unprepared. All these different things that create this feeling of just wastefulness. That you know, when you walk out of that meeting room, you think to yourself, that 30 minutes or that 60 minutes was just a waste of time. I could have been doing better things. And that's one thing, but this is further compounded by the fact that there are just so many meetings. Atlassian, the folks behind Jira and Confluence and some other tools, they did a study that found that on average, each employee has 62 meetings per month. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of time that people are spending in meetings. And then once you couple that with how poorly they're being run, it's really a no-brainer.
Right. And what is the total amount that is estimated that we are wasting in these meetings?
So this is crazy, but back to that study I was referencing, they tally this up based on average domestic salaries. This comes out to $37 billion wasted annually in meetings. I mean, that's just a huge amount, right?
It is. However, what would we do without meetings? Nothing would get done.
Well, exactly. And that's kind of where my background comes into play in that, meetings are still a critical part of, getting work done within an organization. A lot of individuals out there have tried these no meeting policies, where they say, we're just not going to have meetings in our organization. And while I think that's a lofty goal, I don't think it's a very realistic goal. Meetings are still important. What it is important to do is just to get rid of bad meetings, because bad meetings are toxic. Because what happens is when you have toxic meetings, they bring down all the other good meetings, and then nobody wants to go to any meeting at all.
Right. So the information that we're talking about here, by the way, folks, is part of an infographic that Jeff and his company, Less Meeting, have created. And I'll make sure we get a link to this. So what do we do in order to improve? What do you recommend how we get all of this under control?
There's a great question. That's really where our specialty. There's a number of different things you can be doing. The first and foremost is always have an agenda. Take time to plan the meeting, make sure you have a reason for meeting, and then, detail it out beforehand. Take notes during the meeting, document those notes, share them with everyone else in the meeting. More importantly, share those notes with people who might not have been able to attend the meeting. It's a really powerful concept when you realize you don't have to be in that conference room every time, when you know that instead there's going to be some meeting minutes out there somewhere that you can easily access. Take care of task management. Meetings are all about getting work done and moving the project forward. And part of that revolves around statuses and getting those tasks that are assigned in the meeting done. And then following up. The meeting doesn't end when everybody walks out of the meeting room. The meeting actually ends when all those tasks that we've assigned, when those actually get completed. And then that's really what shows the progress of the meeting. And then the last thing is just always improving. So kind of the traditional feedback loop, identify things that are working well, that aren't working well, and figure out how can we make those improvements on our meetings.
The one thing that I would like us to talk about next is the first item you mentioned that many people do wrong, the meeting agenda. So what's wrong with today's meeting agendas?
Well, the first thing that's wrong with them is that the majority of the time there is no agenda. It sounds simple, and I think everybody's probably familiar with what an agenda is. It's nothing too groundbreaking, but it's so often overlooked, yet is really one of the most important factors in a meeting. If you're to break a meeting down into three parts, the before meeting, the during meeting, and the after the meeting follow-up process, everything ultimately comes back to that agenda before the meeting. If you can't take 30 seconds to put together an agenda for the meeting, then I would challenge you to ask, is that meeting really worthwhile? So the first thing is just to do the agenda. And then more importantly, do it beforehand and share it with everyone who's going to be in the meeting. This gives them the necessary information so they can complete any pre-work they need, take care of any responsibilities, all those kinds of things. So that way, when everybody shows up for the day of the meeting, you're ready to go and can really make the best use of that time.
Anything else that you would include in the meeting agenda?
Yeah. So the first thing is just, as I mentioned, to do it. But the different parts, I would break it down into, first and foremost, outline the purpose, outline the goal. So, number one, say, why are we having this meeting? Number two, list a few topics, maybe 3 topics, go into detail, but describe what it is you're going to cover. One of the important things to think about there is that your topics are, first of all, detailed. So that way, it's not just a very generic. Let's say if we're talking about project status meetings, we don't want an agenda topic. A very bad agenda topic would be status. That doesn't tell anybody anything. Instead, let's think about what's the status for a specific project, or maybe even more detail, what's the status of a particular component that we might be building for a piece of software. So let's get detailed on those topics. The second thing to think about with those topics is how do we plan them out based off the time of the meeting? And in particular, one really strong way to think about meeting planning with that agenda is to use what we called an agenda-based schedule. So plan out the length of your meeting after you create your agenda instead of the other way around, which is typically the traditional thing. A lot of times people will go into Microsoft Outlook or Google Calendar and they'll schedule a 30 or 60-minute meeting and then just start listing off some agenda topics. And while it's great they're having an agenda, the downside is that you're really not figuring out the timing of that agenda very effectively with how much time you've allotted. So figure out your agenda and then figure out a couple topics and then figure out how much time you think you're going to spend on those topics and use that to drive the length of your meeting.
How far into the details do you personally like to go in these agendas? Because you said, not just the project status or project status for project, but down to individual items. Don't we get too much far into the weeds here now?
That definitely is a risk, and it's one of those classic depends answer, depending on who the audience is and the type of meeting you're having. But the goal there is to give the person. Here's a good way to think about it. The people that you plan to invite to the meeting, what you want to do is you want to give them enough information so that they can adequately prepare and that they can decide, do I need to be in the meeting? And when you say something like status, nobody can make that. Nobody can do either of those things. But if you give them enough information to say, "Hey, I need the status of X, Y, Z," then that person knows that they need to know what that status is beforehand, so they can get that information ready. Or if they see that, "Hey, I have nothing to do with X, Y, or Z," then they know that, "Hey, maybe I don't need to be in this meeting, and I can politely decline attending."
project managers schedule a ton of meetings, status meetings for the project. We're talking requirements gathering meetings, interviews with stakeholders. I mean, you name it, right? Anything is pretty much a meeting that we do. How do you feel about using templates for these, for creating these meeting agendas?
I think templates are a great tool to use because, again, project managers especially have a lot of very similar meetings. Their status meetings, requirements meetings, stakeholders meetings. And for the most part, they're really the same thing most of the time. What I'd like to do a lot of times is I'll have these same templates for my different meeting types, and then I'll send these out to the interested parties beforehand. And then what I'll do on my own is I'll go ahead and go into that template before the meeting and start detailing out what I plan to talk about within each of those subtopics. And so that latter part, that might be getting into the weeds a little bit for some other people. I keep that to myself, keep that private. Not to try to withhold that information, but I don't want to overwhelm people either. But this way, it makes sure me as the meeting organizer, I'm prepared. So that way, when we come time to have the meeting, we can get down to brass tacks, get to business, and then get everyone back to their desks afterward.
One thing that you mentioned on your blog is also that you say you should assign a note taker. Why?
So one of the things that I think a lot of people can relate to is that it's very difficult to both lead a meeting and take good notes at the same time. It's just a very difficult task to do both of those things at once. And if we've already made the assumption that notes are very important, we need to still figure out a way to do this. And the best way to do that is to have a note taker. Defining these roles ahead of time is a really smart thing to do. It's going to leave out any questions or issues like that when you show up to the meeting. If you didn't plan a note taker beforehand, it can be tough to pick one on the spot. And it just makes that process very easy. So that way, when it comes time to the meeting, you as the meeting organizer can focus on actually achieving the goal of the meeting, and still know in the back of your mind that someone else in the room is taking great notes, so that way they'll be able to share those notes with everyone who wasn't able to make it to the meeting.
All right. Next, I want to take a little sidestep here, only a short sidestep, because we're staying on your blog. One thing that I saw on your blog is you recently recommended 5 productivity tools. Let's begin with the basic question. Why do you recommend these productivity tools, and do they help us with better meetings?
So we are all about less meeting, as the name would lead you to believe, yes. Or fewer meetings. And all of these tools allow us to have fewer meetings, because if we look at different types of meetings, one of the biggest, the most often type of I'm having a tough time saying that. One of the types of meetings that's held most often is a status meeting. And if we think about status meetings, that information doesn't necessarily we don't necessarily need to have everyone in the meeting room together just to communicate information. Instead, what we like to recommend is communicate status outside of the meeting, whether that's email, whether that's a quick phone call, what have you. Communicate that status asynchronously, and then use the meeting time when we have everybody in the same room to discuss the real problems and issues and the real meaty discussions that come up as part of the status. And all these tools help us do that. So if we look at some of these like Mailbox or Trello or Duxboard, and I can go into these in detail if you'd like, but what these allow us to do is make it really easy to share all of the information about our business and how we do our work from a day-to-day perspective, so that way everyone is up to speed on the different things we need to know. And then when we do identify an issue that we want to dig into and dive into, then we can call a meeting to have a really useful discussion about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk for a brief moment about each of these 5 productivity tools, because I personally only know and use one of these 5. So if you could give us just a quick, very 10,000-foot overview here.
Absolutely.
So what is Mailbox? Are we talking about my regular Mailbox? I use Gmail most of the time. Is that what you mean?
No. Mailbox is an iOS app. It works specifically for Google Mail apps right now, but it's an iOS app that makes it really reinvents the way you manage email, makes it much more easy to do it effectively. They're big fans of the Inbox Zero crowd. So with Mailbox, it makes it easier to plow through a long list of emails and clear that inbox out.
All right. What's Trello?
Trello is a very lightweight project management tool for teams. So it doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that a lot of the project management tools does, but it has the basics. It allows you to have tasks and assign those out and track status of those, so we can keep our project moving on in a very lightweight fashion.
All right. Duxboard.
Duxboard. We do a lot of analytics here at Let's Meeting. We're always just trying to let the data drive the decisions for us. Duxboard is a tool that allows you to pull data from a number of different systems, put it up on a giant TV in the office so everybody can see it, and provide some really cool analytics and charts and graphs that tell us where we are doing at a business level or an individual level and a real-time status.
All right. Then the next one is Yammer.
Yammer is a communication client. It's something that runs on everybody's machine and allows us to have kind of like, it's almost like an internal social network for our company. So we can provide status updates, we can share useful links or information, and really easily foster communication across the team outside of email, or more importantly, outside of meetings.
All right. And last but not least, that's the tool that I'm using myself, Evernote.
Evernote's fantastic. It's a great place to store everything and recall it. You can put your meeting notes in there. You can put your requirements in there. Any project information in any facet, you can just dump into Evernote real easily. And then where I find it becomes really helpful is whenever I need to recall something, it's a great search tool. It works across devices, so I can always have access to that information when I need.
Yeah, and across devices that I can really, I agree with that, because I have a Windows PC, I have an iPad, and I have an Android phone, and it works perfectly across all three. I put it in on one, and it shows up on the others.
Absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. All right, so if you could only use one of these 5, which one would it be?
That's a tough one.
And why?
I think it's got to be Evernote, in a lot of the same reasons you were talking about. It works. It does everything in terms of an information capture system. It works any device I'm using. It works any type of information or notes I need. I use it for both personal information as well as work information. And it somehow, I really don't know how, because it's not. It doesn't particularly organize things very well, but it still manages to capture everything I need and make it really easy to recall that when I need it, as easy as could be.
All right. So we talked about the need for having better agendas. We talked about improvement in terms of productivity. We've learned meetings run late, are off topic, no purpose. People come unprepared. There's no accountability. Yes. Often they are too frequent. There are $37 billion wasted every year. How does your tool, Less Meeting, address many of these issues that we discuss? How does your tool help us project managers improve our meetings?
Absolutely. So there's 3 things I want to touch on. First of all, it reduces the quantity of meetings. So by having that shared centralized note system, you start being able to skip some meetings that you might not need to go to. And it also reduces the disorganized and ineffective way that meetings are planned and run and followed up. So that way you're having fewer meetings and you're having better meetings. The second thing is it makes these practices second nature. It makes them subconscious. So it takes all these best practices, they're built right in, and you no longer need to be thinking about, what do I need to do here? What do I need to do there? It just becomes automatic. And then third, and most importantly, is that, meetings are not an individual endeavor. They are a group effort. And, Less Meeting is really a team tool. And so it enables your whole team or your whole organization to start driving some cultural change into how you're running your meetings, which is really a pretty powerful concept. It's no longer just an individual productivity tool. It's a team productivity tool.
Excellent. And where can people find this?
You can just simply go to the website, www.lessmeeting.com, or on your mobile device, you can look for Less Meeting in the Apple App Store.
Excellent. Next thing we want to look at is another infographic that you have produced. In particular, this infographic is about meeting villains. So why are these meeting villains a problem?
I mean, I'm sure everyone listening here has met one of these meeting villains in real life. They come in many different forms or fashions, but they all end up bringing up these same common problems we run into in meetings time and time again. And that's the problem, right?
Yeah, it is. So let's go through them. There are 5 of them. I'll tell us what they are, and then you can give us the problem and maybe also what we can do about it, because it's easy to just say, oh, this person is like that, but we need a solution for how to address this person if we have them in one of our meetings. The first one you have is the meeting hog.
Yes, the meeting hog. So the meeting hog is the conversation hog. They dominate all the conversations. They always have to have a word in. Even if they don't know what they're talking about, they just always feel like they need to have a say. The best thing to do is, one of the very first things I highlighted is to always have an agenda, and not just an agenda, but an agenda with timing. So the meeting hog, this person dominates the conversation. They're always talking, and they always have to have a say even if they really have no business doing so. The best way to deal with a meeting hog is just to have an agenda, as I was mentioning earlier, and to have timing around that agenda. So where this comes into play is, let's say we allocated 10 minutes of a meeting to discuss a topic. When we have this meeting hog come in and start talking, we now see that we've already used up 8 of those 10 minutes to talk about this. We only have 2 minutes left, so we can start using the agenda to say, hey, sorry, buddy, we need to get this back on track. Can we wrap up here? So using that agenda to help keep you railed in.
Next, we have the meathead.
The meathead, this guy or gal always loves to meet. They call a meeting just to discuss other meetings. The best way to deal with a meathead is to make sure you always have a purpose for a meeting. If you can't define what the goal or the purpose of the meeting is, then you shouldn't be having a meeting in the first place. And that's the best way to deal with a meathead.
The third villain you list is the hold-up.
The hold-up. The hold-up is always late to meetings. They never get on time, and 9 of the 10 people are sitting out around the conference room table waiting for hold-up to show up every single time, and they're always late. What we need to start doing is stop waiting for a hold-up. Don't set a bad example. Every time you wait for them, they realize that they can show up late, and everybody's going to wait on them, and it gives them the power. Also, set a strict standard. Say, hey, we're not going to wait. Enforce that, and pretty soon that hold-up's going to realize they need to show up on time, or else they're going to miss important things.
Number 4 is the meeting hijacker.
The meeting hijacker. The meeting hijacker loves to show up to the meetings with their own agenda. So despite all the hard work you put together creating your agenda, the meeting hijacker doesn't care. They're gonna talk about the things that they want to talk about. Kind of similar to the meeting hog. So one of the similar to the solution for the meeting hog, one of the things you can do is to have an agenda, and use the agenda as a bad guy. So when the hijacker starts trying to take you off topic, say, hey, I'd love to talk about that topic. I think it's really important, but it's not on our agenda today that we already agreed to. And then offer to put that in the parking lot. The parking lot is a very useful place to put these off-topic items. So that way the hijacker still feels like they're being heard, that their voice isn't being ignored, but that you can also keep the meeting on time and on track.
And finally, we have Miss, and I also assume Mr. Agendaless.
Absolutely. She and he come in all forms. Agendaless has very long meetings. They ramble on because they don't have an agenda. They don't have a plan. They just kind of they like to come hang out and, hey, let's go do some chit-chat for a while, right? The best thing to do, like I said, is to have that agenda beforehand where you can assign tasks, assign topics, really have that plan for the meeting, and then prepare for that meeting before you show up. Don't show up unprepared thinking, hey, I'm just going to wing it. Even like this call that we're having here today, Cornelius, I bet you as well as I did some time to prepare for the meeting beforehand so that we could use use this time effectively.
Absolutely. And that actually takes me to the final question that I have for you here on my list. And that is quite a simple one. Let's help our listeners out there improve their project. So other than using your tool at lessmeeting.com, what are your top 3 recommendations for our listeners that will help them have better project meetings starting tomorrow?
Absolutely. The first thing they can do is just always have a plan. Take time to put that agenda together, plan for that meeting ahead of time. Second thing to do is take notes. Notes are really important. I was talking to a coworker the other day, and he was lamenting how nobody takes notes anymore. And I think notes have become one of those things that everybody thinks I don't need to do that. We'll be fine. Remember that notes aren't necessarily for yourself or for the people in the meeting. Notes are for the people that weren't able to be there. And notes they're really an enabling tool. They enable people to not go to meetings, but still stay up to date on all the information that they want to know about. And then last is to lead by example. Once you start putting these practices into place, you'll find that people will enjoy your meetings. They'll look forward to going to your meetings, and then they'll start doing these same things in their meetings as well. So it really becomes a reinforcing device where if you do good things, other people are going to like those, and they're going to mimic them in their meetings. One kind of bonus tip is something that you can do tomorrow, and we always like to recommend people when we're working with them is look at your agenda schedule next week. Go to your Monday through Friday schedule. Pick one meeting that you don't need to be at, and take that off your calendar. Just think about if you are booked in meetings from 8 to 5 every day or whatever your schedule is, there's surely got to be a meeting there that you might not be able to get. You might not need to be at, and try just removing one meeting each week to see what that feels like, and don't just remove it and stop going, but tell the person running the meeting, hey, I don't think I need to be here. I think you can get just as much done without me. I'd still love to stay informed. So if you could, send me the meeting notes afterward. But I want to help you out by not decluttering up your meeting. And I think they'll respect that in the long run, and it'll really send a positive message throughout your team.
Great tips. Jeffrey, thank you very much for being on the program today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cornelius.
And that was Jeffrey Steinke and how we can have fewer meetings with less meeting. If you are preparing for your P&P exam, then the best way to calm the butterflies in your stomach is to take a practice exam. Our P&P exam simulator offers you 9 such practice exams. To see how it works and take a free test drive, please go to freeexamsimulator.com. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please do tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. With every project you do, you bring out a part of yourself, and it seems to be quite a good way of expanding a person. Until next time.